Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. 3 minutes to go. Good afternoon, Karen. Good afternoon, Kenneth.
Good afternoon, Marcia. How are you?
I'm all
Good
right.
afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, all.
Hey, Karen. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Please just confirm that you're hearing me okay. It's 2 o'clock.
Quite clearly.
Thank you. I like to be on time. So if you come to my class 5 minutes late, you're going to miss the first 5 minutes of the lecture. So I'm Marcia Roy, and I'm the Director for Graduate Studies and Research. And this afternoon, this is our annual Getting Started workshop, and we usually target research students, Canute, but this year we thought we would invite all of our new graduate students just to give them a little bit of advice, spend about an hour just to give them a little bit of advice about getting your research started, because sometimes that's the most challenging part. I am going to invite you to check our website, because we had this workshop last year, and every year we try to get a different set of speakers, and last year we had speakers from the bursary and from the library. So if you want advice on those matters, then you can go back and listen to that recording. This afternoon, we are going to have a set of speakers that will guide you through tips for graduate studies, your supervisor and you, your research proposal, and research methodology. And we have an author in the group who's going to tell you about writing your literature review. So we're going to help guide you with those things. So the first, and then we're going to have our assistant registrar at the end, who is going to tell you a little bit about some of those regulations that you need to keep in your back pocket to make sure you don't breach any of them. Okay, so we are going to invite our first speaker, which is Dr. Karen Carpenter. And Dr. Carpenter is a senior lecturer and the head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies Mona unit. But I met Dr. Carpenter when she used to be the host of Love and Sex on Nationwide Radio, and I used to listen to her every evening. Karen used to describe herself as a clinical sexologist, and I've never met that word before, and I was in envy of her. Karen is a gender specialist, and she's actually leading the UWI sexual harassment policy, and she will have fancy names for it, but that's how I understand it. And she's also, she volunteered her services of her team in our PhD coaching program. So she came to me and said, listen, we have this program and we can help some of our PhD students complete their program. So we started this PhD program in January, in December. And in January, and it's going to be completed in December, right? And I was very impressed because remember, not many people as busy as we are volunteer their time, but Karen has volunteered her time and the time of her team to help students who have been in the PhD program for a very long time. And she give them personal coaching and group coaching and take them from where they are within that year until they are completed, submitted, and also help them with the Viva. So that's amazing. Okay. So if you have any colleagues with those kind of stresses, we hope to continue this. And I think, Karen, we have 25 people that's enrolled in the coaching program. And I've told Dr. Carpenter that yeah, go ahead, Karen.
I was going to say, yes, we have 25 on list. We are now double checking, you know, like Santa Claus. We're checking it twice to make sure these are serious candidates. So we may end up with about 3 to 5 spaces once we've recalibrated this week. We're in the process of doing that.
And I promise you that if you deliver out of that group, even 15 of those PhDs, I will pay you the next year to do it. I will pay you and your group to do it because this is valuable service. Because we have so many of our students, nearly 25% of our students that are in our research programs, and boy, they just need somebody to help them over that bump. So, you know, you were a godsend. So I'm just telling everybody that. So when you give them some advice, they will listen because they know that you know what you're talking about. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Marcia and team, because it always takes a team to put something like this together. The program makes it look easy, but I know all the paddling that goes on behind the scenes. Thanks for having me. I'm going to focus in on 3 T's today as we talk about those tips, because I like the idea of the tips. And as Professor Roy says, what we offer, in addition to being a supervisor myself of other students, is coaching. So I've spent the last 15 years coaching some 125 students. We have a new batch of 25. So when we're done, it will be about 150 students who will have coached across the universe and across universities overseas as well. And the difference I want to point out between a coach and a supervisor is that, in my view, a supervisor walks ahead of you and tells you what the next steps are going to be. A coach walks beside you and sees the particular spot exercises that you need to do to strengthen a particular area. And I say this to preface what I'm going to talk about in tips, because I am always interested in the success of the individual. One of my main interests, both as a sex therapist as a sexologist who diagnoses and treats sexual issues is the success of the couple, the success of the relationship. And when it comes to graduate studies, the success of the researcher. We need researchers, and we need that empirical evidence that's going to further our university. So big cheers for what Office of Graduate Studies is able to accomplish. And they were so on board when I presented this idea that I'm really, really grateful for the support I get from the Office of Graduate Studies. So my tips for today are going to be about time, topic, and temperament. Let's keep those T's. Time, topic, temperament. Time, you simply don't have as much time as you think. So let me start with that warning bell. Sounds like an alarm, but you need a warning bell to begin with. If you take the time that's been allocated for you to finish your PhD, whether it is part-time or full-time, you're actually counting some holiday periods, some down periods, some family time, and time that you really don't have allocated to that thesis. When I would do the time management workshop at the University of Nottingham in the UK, United Kingdom, I would take strips of paper. We used to have continuous computer paper, and I would paper the room with 36 squares of paper, each representing a month of their 3-year PhD program. And we would go through the room, and I would ask different students, different PhD candidates, to remove the papers that represented time that you did not have. That's the first thing I'm going to recommend that you do. Be judicious in thinking about your time. You do not have Christmas. No matter how much you think you're going to work through Christmas, the work will not be as good if you were concentrating on working outside of Christmas. You don't have summer break. You don't have Easter. And you need to budget some miscellaneous time that's either family time, church time, or some other kind of volunteering time that you don't have to commit to your studies. So look honestly and carefully at the time that's actually budgeted for working on your thesis and begin to allocate those months from the get-go to doing the various things. Please also remember that your thesis is very much supported by the supervisors, by the Office of Graduate Studies, by the university administration. So allocate time for the turnaround of your work. Contract with your supervisor as to whether or not they can turn around things in a week, 2 weeks, a month. What are you expected to do in that process? Are you expected to nudge them? Are you expected to remind them? Create a contract as to how you're going to work moving forward. For myself, I ask all of my PhD candidates to hold me accountable. So they're allowed to say to me, I didn't get back that paper. You didn't answer at the time that you said you would, so that I can keep going in their interest. I very much appreciate that this is their study, and I'm here to support the process. So watch your time from day one. Begin to allocate time to the various components. Allocate at least 2 months per chapter to write the first draft of the chapter, to give it to your supervisor, to get some feedback as you move on with the other thing. Yes? So be judicious with that. Topic. This is one of my great interests. When people say the topic that they're going to pursue, we usually have a working title, a working topic, but I want to encourage you to take that topic and rewrite it at least 10 times. Sounds ridiculous, right? Rewrite it in 10 different ways and ask yourself, which words in this topic am I willing to give up? Because if you were in our coaching program, I'd say to you, I'm going to pay you for each word that you will give away. And when you won't allow me to pay you for some words, those are the words that are at the heart of what you want to do. Those are the words that are going to become the guide for your literature review. So it's quite important as you move
We've lost the sound, Dr. Carpenter. Don't know if you touch your mute.
Or maybe we lost Karen. I don't see him. Let's give her a minute to come back. I think we lost Karen. Oh, there she is. Karen, we're not hearing you. You're
Yes.
on.
You see, you have to be prepared for everything when you're a thesis coach. So I've got my trusty, my phone right here, ready with a hotspot so that I could get back on. Okay, beautiful. So you see, you always have to have these contingencies. We have to think ahead. So I had it ready in the event that the IT wasn't working well. So yes, topic. Nail down that topic. Make sure that the topic says what it is that you are researching. And I always ask people, what is in your gut? What is in the heart of you that you feel passionate about? And how can we make that researchable? How do we make that into a research topic? And the last one, temperament. You may not think that your temperament matters as much as it does, but it most certainly does. And if you ask successful people how it is that they got to be a success in whatever area you think, you will find that there's a common thread of overcoming their own personality, of tempering their personality, of having right attitude before they approach something. You must remember that this is your work, not just because you need to take responsibility for it, but remember as well, it's not the supervisor's work. You cannot be less interested in your own work than the supervisor. You must be more interested than the supervisor. But you must also remember that since this is not the supervisor's body of work that we're looking at, the supervisor's other activities may come in the way. And you have to be humane about how you interact with that supervisor. Remember, they have other outside interests that their own career is doing. So temperament, I think that's one of the first things that I actually deal with when I have a new candidate that I am supervising myself. We get all of the isms and schisms, as the Rastaman would say, out of the way. We have a conversation about who we are as human beings. And we get a sense of what can I rely on this person for? So I think it's quite important for you to turn up as an adult. I think it's quite important for you to temper your own reactions. Sometimes your reaction is very big and very loud and very emotive, but it may not be the best way to move forward. And remember that this other person has another life as well. So watch the temperament, temper your reactions, stay an adult, remember you have a mission to complete, and your supervisor really does want you to complete. Your success is their success, but it is in fact your responsibility to interact with them in ways that make it possible. Remember, it's 3 to 5 years we're staying with you. That's a very long time. So 3 to 5 years of our lives involved in your study means that we have to alter a lot of things in our own lives. So exercise that, what I call, benevolent.
Say it again, Karen. We missed the last 10 seconds. Okay, seems like she's having internet issues.
Exercise benevolence. So, on other issues dealing with matters dealing with that are personal and professional. And it's 3 years that we're dedicating to you, 3 to 5 years. That's a very, very long time. And things will be changing in our lives as well. So be moderate in your responses and establish a good rapport. is really going to serve you in the long run. Yeah? So to summarize, time, topic, temperament. Make sure that you are very conscious about how much actual time you have and put aside time for every single process, including the administrative processes in your journey. There are papers to fill out, there are reports to write, there's a turnaround time. Be very conscious of that. Topic, look at what's in your gut. Is this the thing that's going to keep you passionate throughout the research? And then refine it, write it out 10 times, and keep going at it until you find the 3 things in your topic that you will not give up. That's your literature review. Temperament, be moderate in your temperament, be understanding of others, but show up as an adult and take responsibility for this journey. And that will bring you success. So wishing you the best of success, wishing you a wonderful time here at UWI. Prof. Roy, I would pause for a 5-minute any Q&A that anyone has.
All right, so thank you very much. You're in good time, man. I love
Watching
it.
time.
Time. Yeah. So yeah, so just raise your hand if you have any quick question for Dr. Carpenter. For the 3 T's, and I hope you will never need her PhD coaching program.
Oh, I wish so too.
All right, I don't see anybody raising their hand.
And they can always send it to you, Prof. Roy, or they can send it directly. I would prefer if they send it through your office, yes, so that you're also aware of what concerns them.
Yeah.
But be mindful. Oh, there we go. Spoke too soon.
Right.
Daryl
Go
Palmer.
ahead. Go ahead, Daryl.
You can unmute Daryl.
Sorry, good afternoon, Prof,
Good
and good
afternoon.
afternoon, Dr. Carpenter. My question is, I noticed your the essence of your presentation was more on the research, PhD writing. So what about persons who are doing taught graduate courses? Would it be similar strategy in terms of approaching the research and writing and preparation of the paper?
So you're saying that you're doing a taught graduate program. Is this a PhD?
No, it's a master's program.
Master's, okay. So a taught master's, and how are you hoping to present it? Is it 3 separate papers that are going to be published? What's your format?
I'm not sure if it's going to be published, but it's going to be one paper. If the word limit would be 10,000 words, I believe.
Okay, okay. So you're going to present a research report, and we do expect that at the end of the master's, what you have is something that we wouldn't be unhappy to publish. We do expect that it's going to be of a quality, even though it's not of the length and depth that we would consider even a journal article out of it. Yes? So I would say that the rigor that's required is similar. The depth and breadth is not similar. Yes? I've had, for instance, and I will tell you, one of my coaches, an excellent, I cannot put enough excellence student, yes, who graduated recently with his PhD and got very high praise from his panel. This is someone who, when I read his master's paper, I did not know him. I was an external examiner. And I said when I finished examining the paper, this is someone I want to work with if they ever do a PhD. So do you see how you can shine in a master's? It was so beautifully written. It clearly was above a master's, but it wasn't a PhD. And he had not registered for the PhD. But I knew even then that if that student entered graduate studies and wanted to do a PhD, I would be willing to work with them. You never know who's reading your paper. And we've managed to work together for many years. I now consider him a colleague, and we've published together.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And he's one of your coaches now, right?
Good point.
He's one of your coaches now, Karen,
He's
right?
now a coach, and
Yeah,
he's
there
an
we go.
eager coach, and he applies all of the methodology that we use in his own coaching, and he's brilliant.
There we go. There we go. Do we have any other quick questions before we move on to the next speaker?
Well, as a follow-up, since no one else is asking the question, so since there's this coaching program and there seems to be so much to be garnered and learned from the program, how does one get involved? I didn't hear, I came on a bit late, Prof. Sorry, if I missed that.
Okay, so the cohort that we're working with at the moment is a cohort of persons who have had challenges in completing. So we're not taking any of the day ones at this point, none of the freshers at this point, yes? So you wouldn't have a cohort for new people until we finish with this batch. We really want to see some successes here and some people get unstuck. And already I can see people championing themselves through the process. So it's very encouraging to see the work they're doing. So in another year, when we're finished with this batch, Daryl, by then you'll be doing a PhD.
Yeah, and he won't need a coach because he'll be doing so well.
There you go.
Oh, well, since Prof taught me many years ago, I think I'll just take her permission.
Thank you very much, Karen.
Not at all, my pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
So we're going to move
We
on
can send their questions to you, Prof, and we
Yeah,
can take it from there.
right. So we'll post the email, but it's postgrad@uwimona.edu.jm. So we'll post the email in the chat and then we will forward them to you. So if you have if you pick up any questions, then you can send them to us and we will do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Yes.
very much. We know that.
Have
Your
a
time is
great
so
session
precious.
and
We
good luck
really
to all.
appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So do we have Dr. Hall online, Denise? I was looking earlier, but I didn't see her. Kim, do we have Dr. Hall online?
No, Prof, not as yet.
Okay, she's not here yet. So then we're going to move on. Did Curtis come? I know they have faculty board this afternoon, so did we get Curtis yet?
Yes, I'm here, Prof.
Oh, wonderful. So let me tell you a little bit about Curtis. Curtis is the Associate Dean for Graduate Studies in the Faculty of Science and Technology. He's also a senior lecturer in the Department of Computing. So when I have challenges with, the IT people explaining things to me that I don't understand, I'm a molecular virologist. I study viruses. I will call Curtis and he will break it down because he understands me. All right. Curtis specializes in cybersecurity, and he did something that I was an associate dean before Curtis, and I was asked to do this and I didn't get it done, and Curtis just came in and he got it done. He was the lead on the development of a faculty-wide research methods course. And you notice that Curtis is going to talk about the research proposal and research methodology. And he and his team, which he led, developed a research methods course for the Faculty of Science and Technology. Okay, but the part of the reason why Curtis became a computer scientist, my two sons are in computing. One just started his BSc and the other one is doing his MSc. And you know what all the boys say, right? They say that they are going to make computer games. Well, in Curtis' case, it was that too, but he didn't have the fancy computer. He just had one of these little handheld ones that we used to use in our time. And that is what led him here. So Curtis is going to give you a little bit of advice about research proposal and research methodology. Curtis, over to you.
Thank you very much for that intro, Prof. And your memory is very sharp, man.
Yes.
I don't know if anyone remembers a platform called the Atari. Atari AS400 was that first device, and I still have it. Maybe in some years to come, it'll become far more valuable and I could sell it and retire sooner rather than later, right? Are you able to see my screen clearly?
Yeah, we're seeing it. We're seeing your presentation.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much to the Office of Graduate Studies and Research and the team for the invitation this afternoon to have a chat about research methods and the research proposal. And I'd also like to say thank you as well to Dr. Karen Carpenter, and she also said some things there that resonated with me. And I think I'm almost certain I mentioned it toward the end, if not at the very end of this presentation this afternoon. And that's about being passionate and finding something that you will keep your interest in your research. So as Prof. Roy said not too long ago, I'm in the Department of Computing in the Faculty of Science and Technology. And we're talking about the research proposal and methods of research. And so you're here because you decided to engage in research. And before venturing into the research proposal and methods of research, it's always good to have a starting point. And what's that starting point? Well, what is your area of study? Okay, so maybe you've come in and you're interested in economics, or maybe you're interested in computer science. And if it's computer science, well, kudos to you. There's no better discipline, right? And yes, that is completely biased, but you'll have to forgive me. So that's the broad area. But what in economics, or what in biology, or what in maybe you want to do something in Japanese, who knows? There's something that piqued your interest somewhere in your life, and there's something that you want to do or you want to investigate a bit further. But what is that something that you like to investigate? Is it a problem that you've seen or that you've experienced in your own life that you aim to solve, or a question that you wish to answer? In my responsibilities and my roles as the Associate Dean, one of the things I enjoy the most is when I'm present for upgrade seminars and PhD vivas, and I hear about the research that had been undertaken. And I get to learn a lot from those experiences, from what could be extracted from our plants that we see here every day and we probably take for granted. From something as simple as a soursop tree, to have learned that some of the extract, whether it's from the bark or the leaves, actually can have anti-cancer properties. And so it may have been that where you grew up, and then Prof. Roy will tell you where she grew up and that she is just a country girl, and she was looking at tomatoes and wanted to help the farmers in her community and so on. Maybe a theorem that you have formulated in your mind and you want to investigate to see whether it makes sense, whether it could answer a particular problem or a family of problems. Or it could be a hypothesis, and you've maybe seen something in a crowd or some sort of behavior, and you just wondered why. I mean, for example, these days I wonder why we drive the way that we do on the roads. It seems to be getting worse. I would love to know why. It's something that I've observed, but that's my observation. And maybe I might have an idea as to what is the root cause behind that observation. And so that's something that I may be passionate about, and I may want to undertake some further research into looking into it. And so you will then probably have a question that you should have. If not, think about it. So you have that observation, you have that problem. Why is a solution that you may have come up with, or that hypothesis, why is it important? To you, it may be, but it may also be important to your community. It may be important to the country. It may be important to the region. And so in conducting that investigation and conducting your research, will it add to the existing body of knowledge in your chosen area of study? And so with these four, if you can convince yourself and your supervisor that you have the answers or some part thereof to all four of these aforementioned questions, then you're ready to begin developing your research proposal. And what is that? Well, it's just a document. And a research proposal is a document that is used as the basis for a thesis. And that thesis is that collection, that body of work that you'd have undertaken towards answering those questions or solving that problem or proving that that hypothesis is actually what's behind that observed phenomenon. And it is typically comprised of 5 sections, and that is the research proposal. You have a set of preliminary pages. There's the introduction, the literature review, the research methodology, and some references. Now, we'll take a brief look at what each of these sections should include. You would build upon them as you progress through your work. And as Dr. Carpenter said, you and your supervisor will become very acquainted, right? Because there'll be lots that you'll have to ask. If it's not your direct supervisor or primary supervisor, it could be a member of your advisory board, or it could be somebody who you know is knowledgeable in the particular area that you've chosen to conduct your research in. And so let's see what the preliminary pages typically include. Well, it's things like the front matter, a title page. Now, the title could change, right? As you progress, you may realize, well, that initial problem or that initial theorem isn't quite hitting the nail on the head. And you may want to refine it a little bit. It may be the addition or removal of a conjunction or something else along those lines. Something's fairly simple, or it could be a complete change in the title. But that still gives the reader an idea of what the body of work is about. It will also include a table of contents and some other pages. You may have some figures and tables and abbreviations, right? And abbreviations, of course, are important because you, as you continue down that road of research, will become an expert on that particular stuff that you're researching, right? And somewhat in the field of study in which you would place your research. And not everyone will have an idea of what an acronym means. There are so many acronyms that exist that have different meanings. It just depends on the context of the area of study. And so it's really helpful for the reader to know what a particular acronym or abbreviation or something refers to. Now, it's also very important to follow our university's guidelines. And our university, of course, has those guidelines freely and readily available to you. I've included the URL here at the bottom in black, where you can find the thesis guide that you would follow that very clearly and with examples has the title page and how it should be formatted, the particular font, the spacing of the columns, everything that you'd need to know that would help you in ensuring that your eventual and final thesis that you will submit for examination follows the regulations and guidelines of the university. And so after the preliminary pages, we have an introduction. And in that introduction, you will begin to help the reader form a picture, their own mental picture of where it is you plan on taking them. And a thesis could be a book, right? It could be published as a book. And so you want to sort of guide your reader as to what it is you'll be doing. And you do that in the introduction. And so you'll start, for example, the background discussion of your work, what it is the thesis is going to discuss. What is it you would have been doing for the past 3 to 5 years? Right? What is it that kept your mental juices churning over that period of time? It also tried to be as precise, but as brief as possible with the statement of what you will aim to accomplish with the work that you'll be describing in your thesis. What are the objectives that you plan on undertaking and how you're going to go about investigating them? A justification of the work and or why of its significance, because again, okay, so the title may be interesting, but again, you as the reader and every reader will have their own understanding or their own perception of a particular combination of words and phrases, right? That's their interpretation. But you want to ensure that you keep the reader and their two readers of utmost importance, that's the two examiners, right? And you want to bear in mind that an examiner probably has other things that they want to do, or they may have lots of other theses that they need to read. And so you want to ensure that when they pick your thesis up, that they don't want to put it down. So you think about convincing your readers why they should read your thesis, right? So what's the importance? What's the significance? What's that burning problem that it's going to solve? And then give a little bit about the scope of your work. Is it just something in your village? Is it a particular niche area that you're addressing or that you're interested in solving or that particular observation that you would have made. Okay? So then that takes it to the literature review. And remember, I said that you're going to become the expert on that field or that area of research that you've undertaken. But it still sits within a broader scope. So it could be, for example, on artificial intelligence. But artificial intelligence is an umbrella term, right? There's machine learning, that is a subset of it. And even machine learning, there are subsets of machine learning. And so you still have to demonstrate through what you write in your proposal and your eventual thesis that you are knowledgeable of the area in which your work resides. And it's and often is a delicate balance between the contemporary knowledge or what's been around for the past 5 years or so, but there may be some other bits of work that have been around that are very influential that you may need to make reference to. And so you need to demonstrate your understanding and demonstrate that the work of others has been included in your own, because that's what contemporary research is about, is building upon the work of others. Yes, you have a novel idea, and novelty, of course, is important with regard to a thesis, because, as I said, you're contributing to the body of knowledge of humanity, right? And so you must demonstrate that work of others by showing that you know that others are doing work in a similar field, or maybe something that is actually very close to what you're doing, but you can demonstrate how they differ. That is your work and the work of others. That you're understanding where that body of knowledge is, where things are at the state of art in the field. That you can apply what you've learned. That you're able to analyze, and thereby, remember, a PhD also says to others that you have the ability and the capability to see a problem, to be able to analyze it and to solve it, or to come up with a solution. Not necessarily in your own field, but it's a general approach to problem solving. That you can synthesize or integrate that work of others into your own, and that you can evaluate, including self-evaluation, for what has been recorded and documented in your body of work. And then that leads to the methodology that you would have incorporated in going about conducting your research, right? And so that methodology, or how you went about conducting research, is incorporated by using a number of approaches. I'm going to talk about them, 3 general or broad approaches in a little bit. But it's those approaches that you'll use to develop your proposed solutions, your answers, proofs, results, and tests. And it has to be that methodical way, that methodical approach, because in many cases, you also want to give the ability for someone else to replicate what you've done, to replicate your study, to replicate your experiments, to replicate how you conducted your observation, to prove your hypothesis. And so that research proposal methodology should reflect the accomplishment of these tasks and activities. So 1, you should be able to explain the approach that you incorporated. You should be able to describe the methods of data collection, because more often than not, data is going to form an integral part of your research, regardless of the area of study that you're engaged in. You also need to describe the methods of analysis or evaluation. You should also evaluate and justify your methodological choices, right? Because someone reading, again, will form their own opinions and will have their own questions. And it is up to you to maybe think about what some of those questions are and provide an answer to them in the body of work itself, right? Because, again, we all have different ways of approaching things. We all have different ideas that we formulate. And so explaining the choice or why you made that choice, given the particular circumstances that you found yourself in, would go a long way in answering many questions that an examiner or a reader would have. And then, of course, because we said that research is one individual building upon the work of others, then you need to cite your relevant sources. And again, the university has certain guidelines. And here, those guidelines are with regard to plagiarism. And so we have rules and regulations. You can find them as well from the Office of Graduate Studies and Research on their website. But just ensure that you cite your work, you cite the work of others to ensure that we can see how and where it is you built upon that work, and you maybe solved an existing problem from someone that you identified that someone else had encountered during their own undertaking of their research. And so those references that you would also include, that you cite in the body itself, also become important. And so the references, that's usually the last in this section in the document. And it lists, the conference papers, the journal articles, the books, the book chapters, any of those. There are a number of others. If you like, and if you found some, you could even cite a PhD or MPhil thesis or a master's thesis. But there are particular ways and means that you are to incorporate those references and to cite them. And those ways and means, or those formatting standards, are referred to as citation styles. And some examples include Chicago, IEEE. There are others in the medical field, and others in the social science fields, and so on. Talk to your supervisor, talk to the deputy dean or the associate dean for graduate studies, or some member of staff. They can tell you what is the typically accepted citation style for your particular discipline. And so that standard will include how references should be ordered. It could be numerically, it could be alphabetically, how the citation must be written. Do you start, for example, with an author's surname followed by their first initial? If there is more than 3 authors, how do you cite it? If there are 2, then you simply, for example, in most citation styles, have both authors separated by the conjunction and. And so those styles therefore dictate and guide how you then adhere to the formatting that is required in a document such as a thesis, right? So that's why, yes, punctuation, authors' names, the specification, how and so, it all matters. It's all very important in terms of your final presentation of your work and your thesis. And so let's talk about now, I won't keep you much longer, about the research methods. And there are 3 broad categories. There's qualitative research, there's quantitative research, and there's the design science approach. With the qualitative approach, we're looking at concentrating on the collection or the initial collection and analysis of subjective data. And by subjective, you typically will take a look at maybe people's perceptions. We spoke about hypotheses and observations. So it's those types of things that you start to collect, and then you will, make some inferences or deductions on them. And then the idea is that the intended outcome is to gain some greater insight into those perceptions, maybe how those perceptions were formed, and maybe to provide an explanation, to try to see if you can maybe generalize based on the perceptions, some way that we can anticipate a particular behavior or something along those lines, right? It's really along the collection and then the interpretation of it. And then maybe why those perceptions exist and gain some further knowledge. Quantitative approaches to research, however, concentrate on what can be measured, and the techniques and tools and so on that are typically incorporated are mathematical. And so you tend to find maybe the incorporation of statistical methods, maybe some discrete math, some linear algebra, some calculus. But it involves the collection still, an analysis, but of objective data. So maybe you go out in the field and you take some samples. Let's say it's in a river somewhere, and you're looking at river pollution, and you're trying to determine what actually is causing maybe an abundance of algal growth. And you take samples of the river water from different locations, and you have to document the actual location from the river, from where you took the sample, what date you took the sample on, the time you took the sample, any other environmental factors that may have been of or may be consequential to that research. And so you take those, you apply them, you use your mathematical tools, you create maybe a possible solution, you maybe create an equation that dictates what the level of pollution would be like given these other environmental factors. You look at maybe some dependent and independent variables, and then you formulate your solution, you know? And so when we speak of qualitative versus quantitative, you see that the type of reasoning with qualitative is inductive, or we're inferring general from the specific. When it's quantitative, we more look at the deductive reasoning, which is we're inferring the specific from the general. You'd like to link those concepts by the qualitative research approach, identifying the concepts from the situation, or in the quantitative approach, you determine the concepts and the investigation of the associated relationships which you may discover as a part of your research endeavors. You may usually only describe an action in a situation on the qualitative, or test those relationships further on performing a particular action. And quickly, the outcomes could be illuminated by the situation by including some other examples, or the acceptance or rejection of a proposed theory that you would have included earlier in your document, and the validation of your results, which is also very important. The truth that you could see as a context, was it context bound, was it contextually dependent, is it the social construct, or in the quantitative research, is the truth seen as objective and universal? Is there this one equation that you can apply, that you can use to predict a particular behavior given the certain variables that have been included in that equation, you know? And then finally, where we talk about design science, that involves the creation of information technology artifacts, which include prototypes as a proof of what you have been investigating. And those artifacts can be constructs, models, methods, and of course, the combination of those three where you instantiate or operationalize those constructs or conceptual vocabularies, for example, like ontologies. You may want to, okay, for example, in an emerging field like quantum computing, there may be a number of acronyms and words and phrases and so on that at this point in time would have various meanings. But we'd like to have one general or one understanding or one accepted understanding of these terms and terminologies and so on. And so as a research endeavor, you could develop an ontology, right? Or you can have a mathematical model that expresses relationships between constructs, or you can develop a method or a set of steps that you can use to perform a task, or that method that someone could then take that you develop and again repeat the things that you've done and have similar results. And so with those, research, ladies and gentlemen, is something that you conduct to find facts, so it can be descriptive. You can identify patterns, which could be exploratory. You can explain the whys and the hows and be analytical. You could forecast the likelihood of a particular event and be predictive, or you can problem solve by improving current practices. You could have discovered a problem while working in industry, and it's really a problem that's been nagging you, and you think you have a solution to it, and come in and do some research, solve that problem, and improve the state of the art in industry. And so finally, research will take time and effort. We are all different. It takes some longer, it takes some shorter, but keep the interest. And so it's really important to choose something to investigate that will likely hold your interest for the time during which you'll be conducting that research. And so once again, thank you all very much for your time and for your attention. Prof. Roy, I hand the floor back over to you.
Thank you very much, Curtis. I know that you have to head to faculty board because you hold the graduate portfolio there. But I'm just gonna ask if there's anybody with any question, any urgent question, because Dr. Busby
I
has
told them
to.
I'll be a little late, so I
Okay.
have the time devoted to you.
Oh, wonderful. That's even better. Thank you very much. So do you want us to move on to the next speaker and then
Well, if there are questions, I'll take the questions and then I'll hand over to Denise if she's.
yeah. So are there any burning questions? Dr. Busby Earl is going to stay with us, so that's wonderful.
For another 10 minutes or so.
Okay. All right. So remember, just like Dr. Carpenter, if you have any questions about the research proposal, then you can, and the research methodology, send it to us at postgrad@uwi.mona.edu. Kim or a graduate rep will post it in the chat so you can have it and we will forward it to Dr. Busby Earl. Next, we're going to have Dr. Tanise Hall, and Tanise is a lecturer in the Department of Life Sciences, but she is also their graduate coordinator. And Tanise is an entomologist, which means that she studies insects and she does research on insects. And I would have you know that insects are the most successful organisms on this planet. And we couldn't live without them. Now, Tanise does a lot of work on taxonomy and ecology of aphids, and those destroy your plants and transmit disease and other insects. And she's going to talk to us about your supervisor and you, but I have two stories for you. So the first one is about my supervisor here, Professor McLaughlin, and he and I, we were in Wisconsin, and those are hard days and long days. So I came home and I was having my dinner, and after I finished eating my tuna salad, which is tuna and pasta, and I was having it for 3-4 days and I couldn't have it anymore. I didn't want anymore, and I pushed it away because, you know, enough of that. And Dr. McLaughlin took my leftover and he ate it. After that, he wasn't Dr. McLaughlin anymore. He was just Wayne McLaughlin because we were in this together. We were at it. And it really changed something for me. In 2017, when I became a professor, I went back to the University of Wisconsin and spent 3 weeks with my other supervisor, who is Professor Doug Maxwell, because I just wanted to thank him because he really helped turn me into a researcher and the person that I am today. Even every now and again, I will email him or call him or give him a chat because he has really good advice for me. So sometimes it's a lifelong relationship. Tanise, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good
Just
afternoon.
confirming you can
Yeah.
see and hear,
Yeah.
and you're
we're
seeing my
seeing-
slides.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. You just got a good supervisor story. And welcome to the new graduate students. Welcome to the program. We want to talk about you and your supervisor. And we will look at your choice of supervisor, the activities that you and your supervisor will undertake together, the role of the graduate student, the role of the supervisor, and there are some issues that you face with each other or you may face with each other. And then we'll end by looking at some of the requirements for a good student and supervisor relationship. But I want to start with you. You know, supervisors may be assigned. Sometimes persons are assigned a supervisor based on availability or based on specialization, but a lot of students choose their supervisor. If you made a choice, I would like somebody to share or two persons to share. Why did you choose the supervisor you chose? Is there anybody willing to
My
share?
supervisor chose me when I was an undergraduate student in my final year. He invited me
Yes.
into his lab to do some research. And I remember the first day I walked into that lab and I started and I put on my little lab coat, I just feel like I had arrived and I haven't looked back. I started in the biotech center and I've been here ever since. The university is 75 years and I've been here for 35 and I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, so that is a situation where you were chosen. Right? Well, I chose a supervisor based on subject area and based on my experience in the person's class as an undergraduate student. So I fell in love with the subject area and I liked the approach of the person involved in the subject area. Are there any graduate students?
Well, I don't know. You fell in love with insects?
Yes, I did.
Oh, God.
Entomology course changed my life and it continues to change lives. We just had our 2 weekend field trips and students are greatly impacted by that course.
Okay.
Any other graduate students want to share? You as a supervisor? All right, then we continue. So it's usually based on subject area or your experience with the person as a lecturer or the supervisor approach you, based on your abilities. But you end up in this relationship, the graduate student supervisor relationship. And it is regarded as an extremely important factor that impacts student experience and student success. So there is usually a close contact between the students and the supervisors. It is essential. Now, because of that, the impact of that relationship is the subject of many discussions. It's the subject of research papers. So you could get into research and research supervisor-student relationships. It's even the subject of comics. It is important. So universities usually produce regulations and guidelines that govern the relationship because it impacts the reputation and the career of both the student and the supervisor. And here is the regulation from UWI, Graduate Studies Guide for Students and Supervisors. And you should read it. It lists, I think, 18 responsibilities of the supervisor. There's responsibilities of the advisory committee. I think there are 13 responsibilities of the research student. And it gives a checklist of good supervisory practice. So it is essential reading for research students. Now, there are some activities that you and your supervisor will pursue together, right? And it leads to certain outputs and that you will produce these outputs together. You will have regular meetings and you'll have some impromptu ones, lots of impromptu meetings as well. And in these meetings, you will be making plans for the research, planning the aim, the objective, the methods, the regimes. Together, you will end up completing progress reports. You will ensure that there is safety, especially during the data collection processes. You will ensure that you secure the data together, and you will be having discussions on the findings of your research. You will be discussing how you will disseminate the research. Together, you will end up engaging other colleagues, other agencies. You may be looking for subject area experts. Together, you will be applying for funding, right? And the dissemination of the research, whether it is through the thesis, it is through conferences, through journal articles. These are activities, academic activities that you will engage in together. Now you'll find that different supervisors have different styles. And the University of Waterloo gave a summary of 4 styles. There's the laissez-faire, where the supervisor just leaves the student to work independently. The student manages on their own. There's the pastoral, where the supervisor helps when issues arise. There's the directorial, where the supervisor provides the structure and guidance on the project. But there's also a style that is referred to as contractual, where there is a balance of project oversight and there is also personal support. And that is what is going to be most likely in our context. The activities that the supervisor and the student undertake will not end up being entirely academic, right? There's going to be some personal activity as well. So the supervisor and the student will tend to have lots of discussions about things that are not related to the thesis, world events, ethics, life in general. They will tend to participate together in clubs and societies, things that may have, a peripheral relationship to the subject area. Supervisor may be involved in things and, draft the student into it, or the other way around. There will be the sharing of ideas and the sharing of encouragement. And yes, the student will sometimes be the one encouraging the supervisor, right? Supervisor and students will vent off each other when there are issues, when there are problems, and try to provide solutions for each other. And students and supervisors will socialize together, they'll eat together, they'll laugh together. So there is a relationship where, as was mentioned shortly, you're in it together, right? So you're sharing together. It is not entirely academic. This graphic was published in Issues in Doctoral Research, and it's pointing out that there are a number of factors that will influence the student and the supervisor relationship. And some of these factors are real issues, but some of these factors are perceptions of the student and perception of the supervisor. So as you embark on this relationship, one of the things you should do is try to ensure that perceptions are a little bit more grounded in reality so that the relationship works well. What is the role of the graduate student in this relationship? The graduate student is a student, so the student has to learn. The student needs to conduct the research. The student needs to make presentations. The student, importantly, needs to write a thesis. And this has to be done in a timely manner. The student needs to adhere to the requirements of the degree, keep abreast of the regulations, and the students should also recognize that they are representatives of the university. You're representing your faculty, you're representing your department because you're a graduate student in that department. Now, supervisors will have complaints about students, and a lot of these are very well documented. Right? Supervisors will complain about students' adherence to the guidance that they provide. They tend to complain about the depth of research, right? Sometimes a student may be viewed as lazy, not doing enough, right? Not going the extra mile. Supervisors will complain about missed timelines, and the supervisors will complain about students just missing in action altogether. The student took a holiday. So that's the nature. I mean, none of these lists are exhaustive, but that's the nature of some of the complaints. On the other hand, the supervisor has a responsibility to be fair, to encourage the student's innovation, essentially to give the student wings to explore. The supervisor also has to keep abreast of regulations and subject area advances and provide guidance throughout the research process. The supervisor is responsible for giving the student feedback, whether that feedback is in the form of correction or in the form of assurance. Of course, the students have lots of complaints about supervisors, right? Sometimes they may complain that a supervisor has changed the focus, right? Become interested in some other project, so their minds are elsewhere. They may be locked up in teaching, you know. They may have a number of students, so they kind of stretch thin, right? So there are lots of issues surrounding availability of the supervisor when the students need them. And that results in slow feedback. You know, when a chapter is written and feedback is required, it may be a little bit slow. Students also complain about inadequate or inconsistent direction. Okay, a supervisor says, do this today, and then tomorrow the supervisor asks, why did you do this? And you know, you told me to do it. So there's sometimes inconsistent direction. Otherwise, there's complaints about supervisors sometimes giving students other things to do that does not add to the thesis. So it is at the expense of the progress of the thesis. And students will complain about that. Students also complain about the tone in which the guidance is given. So I have two cartoons, right, from PhDcomics.com. George Cham produces these, and here we see student and supervisor. So supervisor says, I made the tweaks to the drafts you sent me. And the student, you can see the look on his face, you rewrote the entire thing. Yes, it's easier to rewrite it than to point out all the things you did wrong. I call it learning by demonstration. What are you demonstrating? That you're a bad writer. How does this make you feel? Did any of you say, ouch? Is that the way you would want your supervisor to relate to you? So I'm sure each person looking at this will have the way they would want to be given this kind of correction, you know. You may think the supervisor should have said, oh, the idea may be better expressed in this way. So supervisors are responsible for providing guidance and feedback, but we would appreciate if it was done in a nice tone. But one of the things as a student, you also have to mentally prepare yourself for corrections, because some people are offended easily. This might not have offended some people, but it might offend others. So you have to mentally prepare yourself for interactions that, you know, might sting a little. Another cartoon. How do I know I didn't make a mistake in my computer code? Did you double check it? Yes. Triple checked it? Yes. Quadruple checked it? Yes. Did it confirm our hypothesis? Yes. Then stop checking it. Right. So here is an example on a more positive note where the supervisor is providing assurance. Obviously, the student is a little nervous, needs a confidence boost, is doing it right, but just needs assurance, and the supervisor is able to provide such assurance. So we can see that an important factor in that graduate-student supervisor relationship is communication, right? And this communication needs to be clear, it needs to be regular, it needs to be well documented in some cases, it needs to be respectful, tactful, uplifting, and it needs to be relevant. There are other important things in the relationship. There is the responsibility and the commitment. Each party has to commit to the relationship, to commit to the project, to commit to the thesis being produced and the student graduating, right? There needs to be trust, right? Remember, you're producing new knowledge. So there has to be trust that either party, won't publish data without crediting the other and so on. And some of you may have heard, some horror stories in this light, right? The relationship needs the knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, not just in pursuing the research, but also in pursuing that interpersonal relationship. And of course, it needs resources, because one of the things that causes breakdown in graduate research is the finances, the equipment, and so on, access to resources that are needed. So all those things are required for you to have a good graduate supervisor relationship. In this graphic was produced after a study on Malaysian postgraduate students and their supervisor relationship. And they concluded that an alignment of tendencies and interests, improvement in confidence level, meaningful communication, high reliability, mutual respect, and punctuality those are the important factors in the development of a sustainable supervisory relationship. So, how should you relate to your supervisor? Again, not an exhaustive list, but you should really be listening to their advice. And if you disagree, if you have another point of view, you should, respectfully open a discussion on the topic. You shouldn't be afraid to ask questions. Supervisors are people. Just ask questions and be honest about your own competence. If you can't do something or you don't know something, don't pretend that you do or can. Be honest about what's happening with you. You may have things in your life, things with your health, especially your mental health, that is affecting your work at the time. Be honest. Don't just, go MIA, right? And be honest about the work that you are doing, the data that you're producing, and the progress that you are making on the work. Those things will make the student-supervisor relationship easier. You should remember that both your careers and reputations are at stake, right? You should also remember that these persons, you will become colleagues, or you may need to consult with those persons later in life, right? And you got an example of that earlier, right? And while you are at it, you should learn how to supervise, because you will definitely be doing that later in life. You're a graduate student, you're going to be supervising in some capacity later on in life, right? No, I still have a good relationship, right, with my supervisor. My supervisor was Dr. Eric Garraway, right? Recently retired from the department, but still around. Still consult with him every now and then, right? This statement was passed down to him from his supervisor, who is Professor Brian Freeman. In the end, you're either good friends or you hate each other. I hope that you and your supervisor will be good friends in the end. And I hope that you all have a fulfilling graduate career. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Denise. That was good. Love you or hate you. I know that you also have to head off to faculty board. So if anybody have any burning question that they want to ask Dr. Hall, then, just raise your hand and we'll acknowledge you. All right, I don't see anything. If you do think of something, you can still send it to us at postgrad@uiimona.edu.jm and we'll pass it on. And I see questions in the chat. We are going to have the recording placed on the website in a few weeks once it's edited, and so you can go back and listen if there's anything that you miss or want to be reminded about. But we're going to move on to our next speaker. And our next speaker is Professor Kenwood Thompson, and he's from the School of Education, and he's going to talk to you about writing your literature review. And we especially chose Kenwood because he is the author of 7 books. So he's an excellent author. Kenwood is also a certified management consultant and leadership coach. So he might also be able to help you in that area. Kenwood, over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Roy. Thank you, Marcia, my friend and colleague. Thanks for inviting me here. Good afternoon, colleagues. A couple years ago, I was asked to share in a forum like this by one of your predecessors, Prof. Roy, Prof. Shearer. I couldn't find the presentation, and I didn't try hard, really, because I thought I would update my thoughts around the issue, though the realities would have been pretty much the same in terms of my experience, but I'm sure the documentation and the perspectives would have evolved. One of the things I want to share, of course, I typed in how to write a lit review. I approached it as though I'm new to this field. And to my pleasant surprise, I found a site that I feel it might have been written by my supervisor, because it contains the ideas, the suggestions, the guidance he gave. And I'll provide the link to that site later, but I'll begin by sharing a bit of my personal experience, and from it to extract some core suggestions as we go. So the first thing I would say is that a PhD is a journey. And I think Dr. Busby Earle made that point in his presentation. It's a journey. And for me, it was a journey of a few starts and stops. I was told that the field in which I wanted to go, there was nobody to supervise me, or I decided to go into some other business endeavor and then deferred it until later. But what didn't change over the years of my starting and stopping and pursuing, which is the first thing I want to say to you, is that I didn't stop reading. And this is one of the most important undertakings that you'll do as a graduate student, to read extensively in your area of interest. Back in the day, this is now in the 80s and early 90s, we didn't have the internet. The internet became public in 1995. So prior to that, every journal was a hard journal. So I would be signing up with the various journals, and I would have them stored in boxes. I would read them and store them away. So by the time I began to write, there would be all these journals, yeah? But the point I want to make, and the first advice to you, is that you have to read extensively. There are several advantages from this extensive reading, but I'll just mention 2 at this point. And the first is that you are exposing yourself to the field in which you are likely to undertake further research. But secondly, and probably more relevant for this conversation, you are seeing and learning how people write and learning to write well. All right. In addition to reading journals and books and articles, I also would read dissertations. So I would want to see how a dissertation is written, how an argument is built. And again, Dr. Busby Earle captured that proposal section, those first 3 chapters. There are few things more useful for a young researcher than, pardon me, my battery's dying. I'm going to get up and plug it in. My apologies. Right. There are few things more useful for a young researcher than seeing models of the craft at work. All right. As you read, one of the things you want to do as you build your skills is to begin to assess how much sense you're making of what you're reading. And one of the things you want to include in your reading are things outside your area of discipline as well. So you'll see how writing is conducted across different disciplines, all right? And over time, I'm reading from my script, which I hope you can see. Well, let me make it larger. Sorry. Sorry. Sorry, let me go to the next screen. All right. So over time, you will begin to develop your writing style, and you'll be seeing styles that appeal to you. Now, here's something that I suggest you also do, and something that I did. I would share my written work with people just to give them feedback. Even now, when I prepare articles for the newspaper or for my blog site, I would send them to people for them to just to critique them, for them to, because it is through the eyes of others that you're seeing things that you miss, or you're seeing things that you have said in a way that can be easily understood or accessed by others. All right. So sharing your written pieces with others is an important part of the development of the discipline of writing. All right. And mindful of the time and capturing the screen, I would want to say two things as I move on from this slide, that you would want to identify the things in the written work, the things you read that move you, that enlighten you, the things that you find beautiful. And I say that to say that your literature review is not just a hodgepodge of citations and summaries and ideas of others. Your lit review, this is an exceedingly important point, your lit review is to be a compendium of an analysis of pre-existing knowledge, gaps in that knowledge space, but to be written in a way that moves, enlightens, and inspires. I was commenting on a PhD dissertation I was reviewing some months ago. It was exceedingly long. I mean, the thing was almost 200,000 words. And I recommended that it be trimmed substantially and highlighted the importance of beauty, that the writer should strive to reduce quantity into quality and beauty. And this is key, all right? And plan, as you do your lit review and as you go through your journey, plan to publish, because it is through publishing that you're going to give others access to your ideas and to your recommendations and to your work, all right? Nowadays, people hardly go to libraries. People hardly buy books, however good those books are, all right? So you have to find a way of publishing your work, yes, in written form, in articles and books, but also in other ways that appeal to the modern audience. All right, so let's talk about so that's a bit of my experience and some preliminary suggestions. So if my 20 minutes expire and I didn't tell you some of what I plan to tell you, I would have captured it there. So what are the purposes of a lit review? I have them here, and I've listed 6 of them. The first is that it's a conversation with history, meaning to say, you are taking the knowledge that has been developed in the particular field. You're reviewing that knowledge through the work of various scholars, and you are trying to understand what it is that they were saying. And part of the reason, perhaps one of the reasons you are having that conversation with history is so that you can identify the gaps right here. You can identify the gaps which exist in knowledge. One of the first things your supervisor would have told you about doctoral studies, about the PhD in particular, is that it is founded on one of two or both columns. One is that it is a body of original work in relation to an issue that has not been studied or has been studied in a very limited way, and you are identifying a new component, a new dimension of this issue for examination. Or secondly, you are going to be taking a new or novel approach methodologically to studying a problem that others have been studying before. So your PhD is not, its beauty and strength and relevance are not found in the volume of words that you have produced, but is found in the precision with which you have identified a gap in the knowledge that currently obtains and have articulated a view which proposes or purports to fill that gap in our knowledge. All right. So that, in order to do that, then you must have that conversation with history, that conversation with people in the field who have studied this issue or aspects of it before you. The second purpose of a lit review is that it is an opportunity for you to demonstrate familiarity with the subject matter and the context of that subject matter. Knowledge emerges out of a context, doesn't emerge out of a vacuum. So your grasp of the subject matter is to be found both in your knowledge of the subject and the context of its evolution. And it is through that understanding that you'll be put in, you'll be able to claim this position of being an authority in shaping future conversations. So as you converse with predecessors, with others who have worked the field, and as you identify gaps, you are then able to shape the conversation. So other researchers will be conversing with you as they seek to make their contribution. The third purpose of a lit review, actually the fourth, because we have spoken about conversation with history, we have spoken about the familiarity, the filling of the gap. The fourth is the facilitation of the development of a theoretical frame, all right? As you, let me say, explore the literature, you'll be seeing the theoretical frameworks that others have used to define their approach to the problem and the methodologies they have used to conduct their research, right? There are some problems that are more effectively understood through using one method versus another, as my colleague would have pointed out earlier. So for example, if you want to understand people's experience in their contexts, in their communities, their experiences, you are looking at using a qualitative approach that is built around ethnography, and you're proposing to go deep into conversations. But if you want to explore initially a problem, you may want to use a quantitative approach where you do surveys, all right? So depending on the issue you're trying to understand, your methodology will be chosen. And here I want to issue a caution. The issue of mixed methods has become a little bit sexy these days. And I'll hear people say, I'll say to a person, what do you plan to do? And the person say, I want to do a mixed method study and so and so. And I say, how do you get to that? The first question you need to answer is, what is it you want to study? You cannot decide on how you're going to approach it until you decide on what you're going to study, all right? So I would make this important point. How does not precede what. What must precede how. And it's only after sketching the what and shaping the what that you are in a position to determine the best way how. All right. A fifth purpose of your lit review is to position your work relative to others. All right. So as a researcher, you are a budding authority in your field, but you're not yet an authority until you have articulated an original position or an original approach to a matter which stands heads and shoulders in juxtaposition to other theorists. All right. And finally, your research allows you to evaluate the state of current research. So in that conversation with history, which is where we began, you're also, it is not a conversation with ancient history, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. It's a conversation also with contemporary perspectives. All right. Now, there is a misunderstanding, and I won't linger on this slide. I'm just going to keep it there to illustrate a point. There's a misunderstanding that I often hear colleagues communicate, that their lecturer says that they should only have references in the last 5 years or less. All right. And I'm saying to that's a bit of a misunderstanding. Your lecturer wouldn't say you should have references only in the last 5 years. What your lecturer would have said is that you must have references within the last 5 years. But knowledge creation in most fields, not every field, artificial intelligence is fairly new. Cybersecurity is fairly new. Online learning is fairly new. But in many of the fields of study you're going to be pursuing, knowledge has been, the knowledge creation industry or effort has been going on for centuries. So if you're going to study philosophy, you may go back as far as the period before Common Era and look at the thoughts of Plato, who continues to influence philosophical thinking. If you're going to be studying psychology, you might go back as far as the 19th century. All right. If you're studying management, you also might go back as far as the 19th century. So the idea that your references should only be in the last 5 years is not does not make the case for that conversation with history. And it wouldn't provide you with a sufficiently broad understanding of the field so that you could, in fact, identify the gaps that exist and then juxtapose your own new knowledge to what has gone before. So I have these just to illustrate that. All right. So we've spoken about the purpose of the lit review. I've shared with you a bit of my own experience, and I want to reiterate something that I mentioned, and that it is that of reading widely. I would hope that you, having now come into this point in your journey where you're beginning to work towards a PhD, you have come with a background of some extensive reading that you have been doing. All right. You would have submitted a proposal reflecting an area of interest, and that proposal would hopefully have drawn on some of what you've been reading. So the first step then in developing your lit review is to identify the relevant literature. And relevant here is going to be determined by how you scope the problem, by how you interpret the field of study. So, for example, a person is wants to study learning in the study of how schools survived or operated during the period of 2020 to 2022, when there was online learning because of the pandemic. All right. You have to pause to assess how different this event, this once in a century event, was from previous similar events. So although COVID-19 appeared to be, well, in terms of its etiological composition, it's a virus that is unique, but viruses have preceded it. Correct, Prof. Roy? I don't want to enter your field and make myself a fool. All right.
No, you are correct, sir.
Yeah. Yes. Right. So in studying, thank you. So in studying the impact of COVID-19 as a phenomenon, you have to try to understand how similar phenomena affected industry, affected schools, affected societies in the past. So relevant has to be couched in a way that allows you to examine the issue from a broad perspective. In searching for relevant literature, or as you carry out the search and as you begin to expose yourself to the literature, some keywords and concepts are going to be jumping out at you. And at the end of the day, when you produce that final document, which will be about 80,000 words, not 200,000 words, you would be selecting about 4 or 6 key words, which define the heart of your study, all right? But in your reading, in your exploration, you'll be coming across several concepts, and you'll be exploring these to see how they have been understood historically, how the understandings and interpretations have evolved over time, and what are some of the contemporary notions. A couple of years ago, when I was teaching sociology in high school, one of the play questions, not quite play, one of the frequent questions I used to use is this by this British sociologist. I think it was Margaret Mead who first coined the phrase, "Love and marriage go together like a horse and a carriage," right? But who said people get married these days anymore, all right? And who says you need to marry because you love, yeah? In other words, the concept of marriage has evolved over time, all right? Then there was the idea of the family. The family was a man and a woman with their children adopted or born. That was how family was defined 100 years ago, even 60 years ago, until Clark wrote about my mother who fathered me. Now, there are multiple meanings of family. I use another one, which is perhaps contentious, Dr. Carpenter, the idea of gender. Gender is no longer a binary choice between male and female. Gender is on a spectrum, at least that is the understanding. And when you begin to expose yourself to the referencing style, those of you who will be using the American Psychological Association's manual, APA manual, you will see that you no longer use terms like him or her. Those are now terms that are unaccepted or are unacceptable in scholarly writing, all right? So that's a bit of a diversion, but the central point I want to make here is that you identify keywords and concepts and look at how they have evolved over time, all right? Now, a key task that you must perform as you're writing a literature review is to evaluate sources. Friends, I have this guy who would say, "Ladies and gentlemen," this guy loves to drink rum, and once he's in his rum, everybody's ladies and gentlemen. But colleagues, I'll tell you something, there's a lot of fake sources out there. A lot of articles. I mean, you'll see a journal will say on its site that this article was received on October 10 and published on October 12th. When you see that, don't even walk near that. It means that there has been no peer review. The thing has not been subject to scrutiny and rigor, all right? It is very likely a site that charges people to publish And so they measure their efficiency by how quickly your article gets online. All right. You have to be very methodical and meticulous in evaluating your sources, because you can, and now with AI, that becomes even more complex, because I mean, AI and the latest version, ChatGPT can produce a paper which sounds pretty plausible and convincing, but has some very inaccurate sources in it. All right. So evaluation of sources is something that we always had to do from the last 100 years. It is even more critical now. All right. Having then established the frame of the literature with the help, and then sharpening the focus by focusing on keywords, and then ferreting out those sources, both at the outset and in the middle, that are not genuine or credible. You then begin to do your deep reading. All right. And in my experience, it is always good to take notes while you're reading. Even so, if you're reading a PDF document, you have a Word document open where you are doing your jottings. If the document is in Word and is editable, you do your review comments or highlight the areas that stand out. But don't think that you can capture everything in your memory. Your memory doesn't work that well. So you must always be taking notes as you read. And the key element of thoughtful reading and review of the literature is to identify the themes. What are the ideas emerging? What are the perspectives, and who are the authorities which take this view? Who are the people who are what you call the conservatives, if you will? Who are the liberals? Who are the people who represent a particular school of thought as against another school of thought? And what are the themes associated with them? And then secondly, how are the battle lines drawn? What are the controversies among and between authors? On what points do they agree? You know, I'll mention very quickly that when I was studying philosophy in the 1980s, I was impressed by a guy called John Rawls. John Rawls, is one of his famous book was A Theory of Justice, published in 1972, right? And I was amazed. I was moved by John Rawls until I saw a critique made of John Rawls's work some years later by Charles Mills. Charles Mills is a son of Gladstone Mills, a Jamaican. He was an American Canadian that died recently. But Charles Mills did a profound critique of Rawls's theory of justice, highlighting, as Mills did, the absence of an analysis of what Mills called racism. It was altogether missing, according to Mills, from Rawls's theory. And so the point I want to say is that it is important that you be able to identify the disputes and the controversies in the literature, as well as, of course, the areas in which they converge, to see how scholars are agreeing with each other. And even when they agree, there might be points at which they also disagree. So it is to tap those areas so that you can begin to get a feel for how the field has emerged. And then as you begin to shape your own contribution, you want to see what is not said, what is not addressed, what's not addressed adequately, the gaps in the literature. And that is where you are going to plant your pole. That is where you're going to build your authority, because a PhD doesn't require you to simply restate what is there, however elegantly you restate it. A PhD requires you to identify a gap and fill that gap. All right. I think we spoke about this in terms of evaluating sources, but let me just mention very quickly two things maybe. The question of the questions that the author is seeking to answer. Is the author answering questions that have been settled in the literature? and reading widely will help you to know if these are settled issue. Any article you see that is reiterating positions that have been settled or have basically disappeared from the conversation, you know, it may not be an article that needs to take up too much of your time. And the other thing I would mention is, again, mentioned earlier, the question of the methodological approaches that have been used to gather data. Methodology is rooted in the issue of epistemology. Epistemology asks the question, how do we know? All right. If the methodology is flawed, there's a high probability that the findings are going to be suspect. All right. It is like it is, as one jurist said in another discipline, you can't find the right address along the wrong road. If the methodology is flawed, then very likely the findings are going to be questionable. All right. So in terms of your writing, now there are 4 little things I'll just remind you. That in writing, you need to be clear on the questions you're seeking to answer. So in chapter 1, in your proposal and in chapter 1 of your work, you would have articulated some questions, your research questions. Your lit review is built around the research questions. And the first task is to examine the extent to which the literature answers the questions and to highlight or indicate those areas that have not been sufficiently answered. All right. And that is where you're going to make your contribution. So when it comes out to writing your the actual product of the lit review, you will every now and again, as you examine the literature, as you speak to the controversies among the authorities, as you identify the area of convergences, you'd want to also highlight the gaps and then point to your research questions, whether this one here, that one later, to point to your research questions, which are going to help us now to fill that gap. You have asked these questions in order to fill out the gap in our knowledge. All right. So be clear on the questions you're seeking to answer. All right. Ensure, secondly, that you have identified and compartmentalized the categories of the literature. And I want to go back to this point about the lit. So remember I said now, it is not the case that you only have references that are 5 years and younger. Your literature must cover the widest relevant scope, which includes the classical, the intermediate, and the current. 5 years and newer fall into the current references, but you must demonstrate knowledge of what preceded the last 5 years. All right. Ponder what it is that you're going to add to the existing body of knowledge. Keep on, and this is a question I'm going to be asking throughout the course of your study, not just in writing the lit review, but you come back again to it in chapter 4, which is the presentation of your findings. What is the new knowledge that you are adding? Because you're going to find yourself sometimes running with a line that really reflects what others have said and really reflect things that you have long before known and believed. And you have to start now interrogating yourself to ask, so what then new am I bringing? All right. Which leads into this last point, that you must constantly ask yourself, so what? So that this is new knowledge, so what? What does it mean for the field? What does it mean for policy? What does it mean for practice? And that is where your work is going to be adding its value, that people are now able to see the need for new policies, for new approaches, for new technologies, for new pedagogies, because of what your discovery is. And this is where the beauty of your contribution becomes critical, because it is from this you're going to be publishing. All right. You're going to be showing what has existed, and you're now showing what we now need to do differently because you have uncovered all this new knowledge. And finally, just to make this point, that your lit review may be structured along different lines. You might do it chronologically. You may show what has been out there for the last, 100 years ago, and what has changed and evolved over time to the new perspectives of the last 5 years. Or you may do it thematically, where you look at different themes, different perspectives, and provide a discussion around the different themes in the literature. Or you might do it methodologically. You may point to this approach, which this particular study, which took a quantitative approach, or these studies, and these others which went further using a qualitative approach, or even further using a mixed methods approach. So you could build in that way, or you could look at it theoretically by identifying the different theories that have been posited over time, purporting to provide an understanding or interpretation of a particular issue that you're trying to study. And I think I'll stop there. I think I did. How many minutes, Prof?
Oh, you way over time, man. When I turn on my camera, that means you're supposed to be done.
All right.
Thank you
I'm sorry.
very much.
Okay.
Are you going to stay with us until the end?
Yes, I'll stay. I'll certainly stay. Yes.
Right. So if you have any questions, save them for later. Now we are going to have our Assistant Registrar in the Office of Graduate Studies and Research, Miss Georgia Bennett, that will tell you a little bit about some regulations that you need to know. Now, the Office of Graduate Studies and Research, in this office, GB, as we affectionately call her, she's in charge. So anything that's gonna go, anything that goes wrong, she's the one who's gonna have to decide how it's going to get fixed. So she's just giving you some things that you need to know now, so you don't send any problems in here for us, okay? So she makes registrar decision and I make my academic decisions. And part of my health plan, Canute, is how many times I visit GB office every day. All right, how many times I walk down there, and I do that multiple times a day because we don't make any decisions without each other. All right, GB.
Thank you, Marcia. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for taking the time out to attend this workshop. So I will start my presentation by briefly telling you about the role of the Office of Graduate Studies and Research on the Mona campus, and then I'll move right into the regulations. So the Office of Graduate Studies and Research falls under the direction of the Office of the Campus Registrar and the School for Graduate Studies and Research. It has responsibility for admissions, registration, scholarships, examinations of all theses, and graduation. Our office is also responsible for ensuring that all our graduate students are familiar with the university's regulations, as all our programs are governed by them. So my next few slides, I'll be highlighting a few of these regulations. So the first regulation I'd like to highlight is with regards to registration. And the regulation says all students must register every semester or every academic year until your degree has been awarded. And this is a very important regulation because without registration, you cannot enter an exam center. You cannot get a transcript from the university. So it is very important that you register whatever you're pursuing in the semester or for the academic year. Please ensure that you're registered for it. Registration information is normally sent out by the Office of the Campus Registrar, and there is a penalty fee for late registration. So students are encouraged to pay attention to deadline dates. If you have to take, or if you must take a semester or an academic year off from your program of study, you must apply for leave of absence. And leave of absence requests must be submitted by the end of the third week of the relevant semester. And late leave of absence request attracts a penalty fee, which starts at $4,000 and it can go up to as high as $16,000. Now, time limits for registration, and this is mainly for our research students. If you're an MPhil student, you're required to submit your thesis for examination within 3 years if you're a full-time studies student, and 5 years if you're a part-time student. For PhD and professional doctorate students, you're expected to submit your thesis for examination within 5 years if you're a full-time student and 7 years for part-time. Research seminars, still on our research students. If you're an MPhil student, you must register and successfully complete at least 2 research seminars before submission of your thesis for examination. If you're a PhD student, you must register and successfully complete 3 such seminars. For professional doctorate students, you must successfully register and successfully complete research seminars as specified in your program requirements. With regards to cheating and plagiarism, ladies and gentlemen, the university has a zero tolerance approach to both. Students found guilty of cheating, the penalty will range from being disqualified from the exam concerned to being disqualified from all further exams of the university or any such period of time as it may be determined. For plagiarism, if you are found guilty, the penalty can range from a reduction in marks, which would have otherwise been awarded, to being dismissed from the university with or without the possibility of re-entry. Moving on now to our general examination regulations. At the graduate level, the pass mark is 50% and the letter grade associated with this is C. In order to be successful in a course, you must pass both the exam and the coursework components of the course. If you fail a component of a course, you're required to repeat the component that you failed. If you fail a component of a course and the overall grade is greater than or equal to 50%, you'll be assigned a grade FCW, which means fail coursework, or FWE, which means fail written exam. If you get an overall mark below 50% in a course, you'll be assigned a grade F1, F2, F3 based on the overall mark achieved. To continue in a program, you must achieve a semester GPA of 2 or above. If your semester GPA falls below 2 in the first semester, you'll be given a warning. If your semester GPA falls below 2 for 2 consecutive semesters, you'll be required to withdraw from the program. And readmission to a program that you're required to withdraw from is normally considered after 2 years. Now we're looking at class of award. Under the GPA system for taught programs, a distinction would be awarded on the basis of a program GPA of 3.70 or above. A merit will be awarded on the basis of a program GPA of 3.30 to 3.69, and a pass will be awarded on the basis of a program GPA of 2 to 3.29. In the case of professional doctorates, the following conditions apply for high commendation to be awarded: a GPA of 3.70 or above in the coursework component, a program GPA of 3.70, no failing grades over the duration of the program, high commendation for the thesis component, and unanimous recommendation of high commendation for thesis by examiners. In the case of MPhil and PhD students, the following conditions apply for high commendation to be awarded: at least one of the examiner's reports must make the recommendation at the point of examination. Examiners must be unanimous in their recommendation at the oral examination that such an award should be made. And my final slide is just to bring to your attention the programs that fall under the non-GPA stream. Therefore, when these students were registering in September, they would have registered as non-GPA students. So as I had indicated before, these are just a few of our regulations. You're encouraged to read through the booklet and familiarize yourself with the other regulations. If in your reading you have any regulations that you need clarity on, feel free to reach out to our office. We'll be happy to assist you. Thank you. Back to you, Marcy.
Thank you very much, GB. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our presentation, so we will take questions or any concerns that you might have. So just let us know, raise your hand, I'll acknowledge you, and then you can ask your question. So are there any burning questions? Remember, you can always email us later on if you have any questions, and we will provide an answer for you. We want you to enjoy this graduate degree. One of the best decisions that I've ever made in my life is when I decided I was going to do a PhD. That degree has been supporting me now for 20-something years. So you're in a good place. So any question about any of the presentations? About your literature review, your research methodology, any regulation that you might have some concerns about? The regulations were in the chat. We also put the email address where you can reach us. All right. Okay, Camille, go ahead. And I see, yeah, Camille, the recording will be available in a few weeks. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to know that. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I saw your message. I'm not good at multitasking, just one thing at a time. So yeah, the recording will be there. And I had indicated when we began that we do this workshop annually. And in the previous workshop, we had information from the library and information from the bursary, presentations from the library and the bursary. So you might want to go back and look at the previous Getting Started workshop information, because library and bursary information is there that you might find useful. All right. Yeah, Steph, go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon. I realize you say that most of the books in the library are outdated. And so when I'm doing my readings, I have to go online, and not all the books are available online because some of them UWI has not subscribed to them. And so I feel like I am short of knowledge, short of information, short of content.
Right. So if you need if you need a document that's not available, then you can ask the library and maybe they can source it for you. It might be at a cost, but you can imagine that there is so much information out there that the library is not going to host all of it. Steph, what I do is that I might have a colleague on another campus or a colleague, you know, somewhere else in the world, and usually I will check with them to see if they have the particular publication that I'm interested in. For us who teach, you know, the books, if the bookshop buy the textbooks, then usually the publishers would give us, allow us access to the electronic version of the books. So all of those work when you want to find some information, because yeah, there's a whole world of information out there, and there's no way the library can host all of it. So there are several strategies that you can use. Steph, I hope you found that useful.
Okay, and I was thinking that the same thing that, I don't remember his name, he spoke about like this new, those that are current, those that are intermediate, those that are historical. It's the same problem I'm having because I don't have any hard copy of something that is from 2019, say from 2017 down. You have most persons now producing their things or publishing it online, and we can't get access to it, as I was telling you. Some of them we have to subscribe to, which is costly and so on. So the library needs some more hard copies of books that were produced 5 years ago so that we can get access to them to read them. UWI Link, yes, UWI Link has, but they have the content online. But I'm talking about going into the library, taking up a book, because some of us are old-fashioned. We like to take up a book, to hold it, to turn the pages, so and to read.
Yes, Steph, that's expensive. So if we're going to get hard copies of some of those books, then there might be some database that we might not be able to subscribe to. So yeah, I like to read my book too, but you know, gotta grow up sometime. So what I have, Stephanie, is a big screen, and I read electronic things from there. So if we
Okay.
try to get those hard copies, then we might not be able to subscribe to the databases that we need, because hard copies are very expensive.
Okay, I understand. Thanks.
All right. Any other question from anyone? Any other concern that you might have? Remember, even later on, tomorrow or on the weekend, you can always email us and we'll try to respond to you in good time. Okay, I don't see anything else. I don't see any other questions. So ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you very much for joining us. This is a wonderful journey that you are going to take. And I know you are anxious, but you're also excited to get started in the Office of Graduate Studies and Research. However we can help, you can always reach out to us. We want to make your journey as seamless and as enjoyable as possible, because we know there are going to be challenges. All right. Have a good afternoon. And I'm sure we'll hear from you in the office.
Thank you.
Right. So Kim just posted useful tutorial from the library about how to access information. So there's a wealth of information that has been posted in the chat, and you know they will be there in the recording if you need that. Kim, did I miss anything?
No, Prof, that's it. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, have a good evening and thank you for staying with us. Bye-bye.